Welcome back, everybody. Another edition here of the Auburn Undercover Podcast on the 24/7 Sports Network. My name is Nathan King. We're going to continue our look at Auburn's 2022 regular season schedule. We got into the SEC schedule last time around when we were joined by Max Baker to talk about Missouri, and now we are not only moving on to the next game, the SEC schedule, we're moving on to the SEC West, first division game of the season, and this is the final game of Auburn's 5-game home stretch to start the season, and it is against one of their biggest rivals, LSU. And so we've got Matt Brune in today from Geaux247, the LSU 24/7 site. Matt, thanks so much for joining us today. It's LSU is one of those schools, pretty much them and USC, along with a few others that are maybe a tier below, that dominated the offseason news in terms of a coaching change. Brian Kelly now is in there from Notre Dame. You've had a whole spring with him. Obviously, he got hired, went through the whole spring. Now we're deep into the summer. Just I guess now that it's, several months post-mortem of that hire, and he's had an opportunity to entrench himself in that program. What are your thoughts on Brian Kelly? Obviously, it seems like a great move from the outside, but with you being on the ground there, what does the program think about him, and what are your thoughts on him heading into his first season?
Yeah, it's been about 6 or 7 months at this point, and when they had the hiring process for a few weeks there, we weren't really sure where athletic director Scott Woodward was going to go with this, and eventually he went with what he's been doing, whether it's with baseball, with women's basketball. Really, most hires that he's made at this point have been kind of splash type of hires. So to bring Brian Kelly in from Notre Dame was obviously a big deal, and getting to see him assimilate, getting to see him kind of work through getting comfortable in Louisiana. Obviously, he's been a Midwest guy his entire life. And then him starting to build his program, starting to figure out the recruiting trail, starting to bring in transfers, like you mentioned, a very eventful offseason where they bring in, I think it was like 15, 16 transfers, 15 freshmen, and it was just every single day it felt like something was coming up. So we got to see a little bit of Brian Kelly, the recruiter, a little bit of Brian Kelly, the coach, and Brian Kelly as now the Louisiana man, which is always which is going to be an interesting aspect. But at the end of the day, all that matters is, can he coach this team, and can he coach this team up? Can he win games at LSU? Which obviously he has the track record of winning games wherever he's been. So I'm not concerned with that, but it is obviously a different animal, recruiting and playing in the SEC. And that's why he took on this challenge. So I look at him as a guy who was hungry to take on a new challenge, knew LSU was a great opportunity for him. And I think he's done a great job kind of getting comfortable in this new setting so far.
Has the Southern accent become a real thing for him, or do you expect that to make a comeback? Has it made a comeback, or was it just that one isolated?
It has not.
That was an amazing day on Twitter. That was great.
It was an amazing thing. And the thing is as I think all SEC fans are kind of similar in this way. If you win, it doesn't matter what you do. Like, he could come out in like a flamingo hat or something, and as long as they go 10-2, nope, everyone's gonna be giving him a standing ovation. It's the so, but hearing that, because I was there, I was at the game, I was at the basketball game where what happened. I was like, and I didn't really hear it, and then all of a sudden I get on Twitter and it's like, oh, he said family weird. I was like, yes. And so now his daughter was making fun of him on Twitter for it and everything. So it's just been a joke at this point. And if in 5 years, if he ends up flaming out and nothing, and they end up not winning games, then we'll look back on that and be like, see, we knew at that point. You can't have a Midwest guy come in, even though Nick Saban came in and was fine. But still, and in 5 years, if they end up winning a lot of games, we'll look back on it and laugh. And so it's hit or miss. But yeah, the accent has not made a return to this point.
Well, maybe after some sort of good win, we'll get it this year. Yeah,
he should go in the press conference afterwards and be like,
absolutely,
that was a big family win, something like that.
Yeah, after they beat FSU in the opener, maybe we'll get one of those.
100%.
Yeah, I mean, the SEC is definitely the weirdest conference, because you'll have somebody like Dan Mullen show up in a Darth Vader costume. So when you said that about him showing up in whatever he wants, I would not put it past any of these coaches. Speaking of a guy who is not from the Midwest, a guy who has Louisiana as they come. Obviously, it's no longer Ed Orgeron at LSU after last season. That was sort of a weird situation, because it was one of the rare instances where They knew he was out before the season was even over, but they gave him obviously the opportunity. I believe it was mid-October that they made that announcement. LSU ends up going 6-6 in the regular season and then losing their bowl game. So I guess all the Tigers in the SEC, I didn't even think about it. Auburn, Missouri, and LSU, they all went 6-7 last year. But they show Ed Orgeron the door. Speak on what you'd like to about Ed O, but really just what was last season about for LSU and that team's identity? What kind of went wrong for them to end up at 6-6? And how much of that do you think is permeating over to this year? How much work does Brian Kelly have to do based off last year's team?
I mean, I think there's a lot of work. I think we could start at the end of last year and kind of go backwards in a sense, because you mentioned the bowl game. They had, I believe it was somewhere between 35 and 40 players, like scholarship players, suited up for the bowl game last year. And they didn't have a quarterback, so they had to have John Trey Kirkland play quarterback with a receiver, basically. So they basically ran a Wildcat set the whole time. And it kind of just showed the situation that this program is in. Not only do you lose your head coach after 2 years after winning a national championship, but you had guys dropping like flies because of injuries, because of transferring, because they wanted to redshirt. And then obviously after the season, you have, I don't want to say an exodus, because there's a lot of teams that lost a lot of players, so it's not unusual. But you have some players leave, like Max Johnson at quarterback, and so on and so forth. You have some decommitments whenever Ed Orgeron's fired in the 2022 class. And so with that being the case, to answer the last part of your question, I think there's a lot of work for Brian Kelly to do when he stepped on campus. And we saw that with the transfer portal. Obviously, I think they finished the year, I think they finished third in the transfer portal rankings. Obviously like USC and I think Ole Miss were the top two. So you finish right behind them. It just shows, you had 15 players that should be able to help you immediately, if not starting at least for depth purposes. I look at that and be like, all right, he knew he can't go in here and just recruit a freshman class. This is not a team with enough top end talent to play with any of these guys. You lose Derek Stingley, you lose Eli Ricks, you lose Damone Clark at linebacker. Go down the list of all the players that they've lost from last year, even if a lot of them didn't play. You had to bring in a guy like Jarek Bernard Converse and Mekhi Gardner at corner, and Joe Fuchsia and Greg Brooks from Arkansas. You had to bring in those guys to kind of replenish it. But to bounce back to last year real quick to wrap it up, I mean, you kind of knew the writing was on the wall. I know some coaches have even said that after the UCLA game to open the season, like that was just kind of a tone setter. They weren't good enough. And UCLA had a fine year last year, but LSU is supposed to be able to beat UCLA when UCLA is not 100%, not playing at a USC level. So that one, and then, the loss to Auburn, I think was huge as well. That Bo Nix game was incredible. And then the dagger really was that Kentucky game where they get drubbed by Kentucky 42-21. They come back, beat Florida, but it didn't even matter. They fired Orgeron that same weekend. At that point, they hung with Alabama for a bit. They hung with Arkansas, and then they beat A&M. And that kind of put a bow on the season, which was a really weird season to cover just because of all the uncertainty and all the exterior factors going on.
Yeah, I was wondering what was that, final point where LSU said enough is enough in terms of Orgeron's tenure. It's always
I don't know if you watched that Kentucky game. That Kentucky game was awful. I think it was 35-7, like late in the fourth.
Jeez, yeah.
And then they put on some touchdowns. Like it was not good at all. Not good.
So Auburn went there October 2nd and won. First time since 1999 Auburn had won.
Crazy game.
In Baton Rouge. Yeah, absolutely insane game. And then, they turn around the next week, lose 42-21 at Kentucky. You mentioned the transfers, one of whom is coming in at the quarterback position. Then you had Max Johnson leaving there. Everyone wants to talk about quarterbacks, of course, all across the SEC. There's a lot of quarterback battles. And Auburn's got kind of a direct association from last season with TJ Finley now on their roster. Kind of an indirect association with them getting Zach Calzada. Max Johnson goes to Texas A&M. So
little three-way trade.
Yeah, the SEC West
right.
They're just swapping around quarterbacks. But it seems like a three-man race from the outside. But I guess you tell me what the situation looks like at QB exiting the spring. I know they didn't exactly have everybody there. Maybe they did, and what you kind of expect out of out of fall camp and how you see, maybe not a prediction for this battle, but who you might view as the front runner heading into the fall.
Yeah, it definitely is a three-man battle here. Miles Brennan, Jaden Daniels, Garrett Nussmeier. I think if you ask fans, I think most of them would say Miles Brennan at this point. Now, did I feel overly inspired by any of the three? Like, did I say that one of them was definitely going to be the starter? No, I didn't. They all bring very different things, right? Miles Brennan has 5 years of experience, even though he's only played 3 games. Jaden Daniels was a starter at Arizona State for 2 years and has incredible legs and mobility. Garrett Nussmeier is the young guy that has a terrific arm and great upside and potential, but you don't look at this group and be like, all right, this is definitely the order here. I don't think anybody can do that right now. And not for nothing, I've been looking at this group. If you would ask me this question 2 weeks ago, I would have said Miles Brennan probably is the guy. But right now, the way I look at it is it's pretty dead even to me. Garrett Nussmeier is really, really talented. And I'm not sure he's getting the credit that people really should be giving him at this point. He might have the best arm of anybody in that room. And with that being the case, I can see Brian Kelly. He doesn't have ties to these guys. He doesn't have ties to Miles Brennan. Obviously, he brought in Jaden Daniels. So to a degree, he has tied to him. But you could look at Garrett Nussmeier's spring game and just be like, all right, that's the starting quarterback. If you only watch the spring game, Garrett Nussmeier is the starting quarterback. Jaden Daniels is obviously the runner, and Denbrock and Kelly have had Mike Denbrock, the offensive coordinator, and Brian Kelly have had some mobile guys in the past. But there were some questions about his accuracy coming out, which I think were valid. And then but Jaden Daniels does also have the most experience. And then you go to Miles Brennan, and Brennan is the old guy. He's the one that a lot of people expect to be the starter just because he's kind of the incumbent type guy that's returning. And he had those 3 great games in the 2020 COVID season against Missouri, Vanderbilt, and Mississippi State. Like, he put up like 400 yards a game. So they're like, oh, that transfers. I don't see that being direct. So I think it's a very open competition. Like, Nussmeier and Brennan, and I could see an avenue in which any of these 3 start. It's really tough for me at this moment. I've never seen a quarterback competition like this. Like, even we talked beforehand, I was covering North Texas. There were a lot of quarterback competitions after Mason Fine left, and this is so I've been through plenty of them. This one has me perplexed, to say the least.
Is the goal for Kelly? I don't know if he's been concrete on this yet because we're still far out from preseason camp, but is the goal to have a guy by the Florida State game, by the season opener, or could that be a situation where you're still playing a few guys in that game?
I think the goal is to have a starter. The goal is to have a one guy. And he mentioned that after the spring game that he wanted to get down to one guy. And I think that's an obvious goal to have. The only thing is, if it is Miles Brennan, he goes out and throws an interception 3 plays into the game, or doesn't have a good opening couple drives, do you then turn to one of the other guys? Like, I mean, you see it all the time where it's like, okay, we're going to give this guy a shot. And if something goes wrong, that's where you're really challenged as a coach. Are you going to ride with him? Basically, that's the question. And I don't think any of these guys are good enough to be like, this is the guy we're going to ride with 100%. And so that's where I'm at. I'm not sure. I think all 3 of them will get snaps. I don't know if it's the best thing for this offense. Now, the bigger question is, with all 3 of these guys being such different types of players, what does an offense look like built around Jaden Daniels? What does an offense look like built around Miles Brennan? What does an offense look like built around Garrett Nussmeier? Because those are 3 very, very different players. Miles Brennan is more of a pocket guy, obviously. Jaden Daniels, you're going to have a run element. Garrett Nussmeier is really good on the throwing on the move. Those are different offenses. And for not only do you have an offense that is has a new offensive coordinator, Mike Denbrock, but now you're telling me you have to, for lack of a better term, put in 3 offenses. It's not ideal. So I think a dream scenario, I think what Kelly and them want is like within 2 weeks of fall camp, be like, all right, we're starting this guy and we're going to build our offense around him, get packages for him. Maybe, in the back end, put some in for Daniels or whatnot. But like, I think you just got to pick one and go to start the season, and then just hope you picked right.
What are you expecting out of Denbrock in that offense? What did you see out of the spring that was a little different than the Edo regime? I know that Keishon Butte returning was massive for them, him still being on this roster. Whomever wins the quarterback battle,
Yeah.
you've got one of the best receivers in the SEC at your disposal. But I know that, like you said, it might be a little too early because you'll kind of tailor it around the quarterback. But what is the difference between what Mike Denbrock is doing right now with this offense versus what it looked like last season and the seasons prior?
Yeah, well, when they got here, and obviously you go back and watch like Cincinnati and Notre Dame film from the last 2 years, and I think the main thing that stands out to you is the tight end usage. And Denbrock and Kelly have used tight ends more in the past than LSU has, I think. And the problem with that is LSU doesn't have tight ends. That's probably their weakest spot on the entire team, by a good margin too. It's not really close. They really only have one scholarship tight end. Well, two now with a freshman Mason Taylor coming in, but like Cole Taylor is your only scholarship guy. Jack Mashburn is a guy they put on scholarship, was a walk on. And then they, like I said, they have a freshman and Mason Taylor coming in. So it's a room that you don't want to rely on. And so now, with that being the case, I think they're going to do a lot more 4 receiver type sets, utilize the receivers. I don't think you can come to LSU with the history and pedigree of receivers that they have at LSU and be like, yeah, well, we're going to do what we do and play tight ends, like, or play 21 personnel or 12 personnel. Like, I just don't think you can do that. I think you have to have 3 or more receivers on the field most of the time just to utilize the offense. So last year's offense might have been, with Jake Peets, it was just such a weird combination where like Orgeron didn't trust him, and then like he wasn't sure exactly what to do. He didn't trust Max Johnson and everything. A lot of RPOs that they couldn't figure out with the run blocking. It was a mess, an absolute mess last year. So I think if nothing else, just to see some continuity and see them kind of get comfortable with each other is interesting. But that's the main thing from a personnel standpoint is I would expect them to be more spread than they have been in the past when it comes to Kelly and Denbrock.
I've heard some Auburn fans talking about it just when we've gone through the schedule and looking at LSU and that game. And I think just the common sort of saying for LSU is, well, they're always going to have talent. It's Brian Kelly. It's year one. Might take a little bit. Might be early in the quarterback development, whatever. But they're saying, well, it'll be difficult because they've always got talent, particularly on defense. How is that set up for LSU right now? How many guys did they lose off that defense? And I know that their defensive line, particularly at the pass rush, might be their strongest spot on the roster, maybe. But you just walk me through what they've got on defense. They lost Derek Stingley, one of the best defensive players in the country. But it seems like they've recruited well over the past few years, and it wasn't too bad of an exodus. But is that still going to be a strong suit for them? And how much work do they have to do on that side of the ball?
Yeah, they lost Stingley, like you mentioned, who didn't play much last year, and then Damone Clark, who was a finalist for the Butkus Award. He would have been a second-round pick if he had a back surgery that's going to make him miss his first year in the NFL, which sucks. And then Neil Farrell was a really good defensive tackle. Glenn Logan missed a little bit of time at defensive tackle as well. Andre Anthony got hurt for the second half of the year, defensive end. He was good. So you look at that. Eli Ricks missed the second half of the year. I'm probably missing somebody, but yeah. So it was plenty of injuries, and the defense, like you mentioned, man, the defensive line should be on paper one of the best defense lines in the country. Like I'm just, every time I look at this defense line, I just get more and more excited because it's Jaquelin Roy is going to be a top 3 round draft pick at the very least. Mason Smith is going to be a sophomore. When he becomes eventually draft eligible, Mason Smith will be a first round pick, in my opinion. This dude is a 5-star. He's absolutely incredible. BJ Ojolari, who plays like a defensive end, outside linebacker, flex position. I think of the easiest way to describe Matt House's defense and BJ Ojolari in it is, if you remember those Kentucky defenses, which Matt House was a DC for, and you remember Josh Allen at defensive end / outside linebacker, that's going to be what BJ Ojolari is playing. And I honestly think he has good potential to play as well as Josh Allen did on those Kentucky defenses. So you have those 3, and then you have Ali Gay, who I think would have been an NFL draft pick if he didn't get hurt last year. So he came back, and I think I've seen some mocks with him as a second or third round guy. In theory, you have 4 guys here that are going to be very, very, very good. And then you bring in Mekhi Wingo from Missouri, who was an all freshman team selection at defensive tackle. And, there's some other names. I won't just list them all, but the defensive line is absolutely absolutely incredible. And that's what this defense is going to be built around, is getting pressure on the quarterback and just winning your one-on-ones with these guys. We could talk about the back end later, but it starts with those guys.
Yeah, look, I guess we'll go right to that. Talking about the linebackers and the back end of this defense. We've sort of talked about this with everyone we've had previewing Auburn's schedule because we're still in the early part of the schedule. So Auburn's in a similar situation. They might have a quarterback at this point, but he's not going to be completely comfortable with the offense. It's not, he's not going to have weeks of experience. At this point, they'll probably still be leaning on the run game, especially against what is going to be a really talented pass rush in LSU, because unless it's Robbie Ashford for Auburn, the Oregon transfer, there's not a lot of athleticism from Zach Calzada or TJ Finley to be able to move outside the pocket. Do you perceive that LSU might have an advantage on the back end in this game against Auburn? Auburn's got some shaky receivers. I guess what does LSU bring to the table there? Like you said, they lost Stingley and Ricks, which Stingley, of course, last season.
Also, another player I forgot to mention was Cordell Flott in the
Yeah.
slot, who ended up going, I believe, in the early third round in the NFL draft, who actually had a pretty good year last year. He started almost all of the games. So,
Yeah.
you throw him in the mix. And with that being the case, they had to go transfer portal, like I mentioned. Joe Fuchsia from Arkansas, Greg Brooks from Arkansas, Mekhi Gardner from Louisiana Lafayette, and Drake Bernard Converse, a first-team All-Big 12 from Oklahoma State. So you replace those four positions. You return Jay Ward at safety, and who I think is a good coverage guy. It's a question mark, I think, still. As much as I think the talent is there, I mean, Fuchsia and Brooks from Arkansas they've established themselves as SEC starters. Like Arkansas last year, their defense was good enough, and it was a lot because of Fuchsia and Brooks as playmakers. So you add them, and I think expectations are very high for them to be quality players. Bernard, like I said, is a first team All Big 12 player on one of the best defenses last year at Oklahoma State. And Mekhi Gardner was an all Sun Belt selection. I think he has really good size. I watched him a lot in the spring, and I was impressed. So on paper, I think the defensive backfield should be set. Like I think they should be good. Now, obviously, as we know, a lot of the production from corners and safeties and those defensive back positions are a lot of times what from the are products of the coverages they're in, are products of the defensive line's production, and products of the down and distance. And I think if Matt House's defense can put them in favorable situations, I think they're going to be very, very solid. Like I don't think there's a Derek Stingley here. Like there's not a first round draft pick by any means. Like you're not getting even Eli Ricks here, but you have a bunch of solid players who should be solid SEC starters. And with that being the case, I look at it as not being a huge strength by any means, but because of the experience and because of just what we've seen them do already, not only in the previous season, but also in spring, because of that, I can't see this being a weakness for them.
I wanted to pop this one in here just real quick before we talk about the schedule. Auburn's got for the second straight year an LSU transfer. What can you tell Auburn fans and the listeners about Coy Moore? I know it was an interesting season for him last year because I think he was the first guy to transfer.
Yeah, I
Once
think he
Edo
entered the
got
portal. I
it's
don't
like
know.
October 15th or something like that. Super early. His 2020 was really good though, and then his 2021 kind of digressed. Just tell us a little bit about what he brings to Auburn and whether you think he can make an impact this season.
He can be a possession receiver, I think. And obviously, I don't have like LSU's depth chart or anything in front of me here, or I'm sorry, Auburn's depth chart in front of me. But yeah, he can definitely be a possession type receiver, someone who has pretty reliable hands. He's not a burner by any means, but I think can be a smart enough player. I think in 2020 he showed that enough. If he can run routes at a high level, which I think he could in theory, I think he has the hands to be one of those third down type receivers that you might go to, whether it's in a slot position or just as a backup outside receiver. I'm interested to see how he does. I'm not sure. I like I said, that 2020 season showed me enough potential to where I'm like, okay, he can play at an SEC level. I'm not sure exactly what happened in the 2021 season where that caused him to leave, so I can't speak on that. But if nothing else, I think he has the ability to a degree. I mean, he has the ability to play at an SEC level, which he's proven in 2020. So I think he's a fine player, and I would expect him to at least be in the rotation for Auburn.
All right, so this schedule for LSU, Auburn is not the first SEC game of the year for them. They've got Mississippi State at home before that. Fun non-conference game to open the season. It's actually on a Sunday. It'll be kind of a home game for LSU. It's in the Superdome in New Orleans. They play Florida State. They've also got a couple buffer games in there against Southern and against New Mexico, and then they go to Jordan-Hare on the first Saturday in October on week 5. What do you make of this schedule overall for LSU? And I mean, what do the win totals kind of look like? What are just the general expectations? I know that maybe win-loss isn't as important in year one as showing obvious growth as a program, but what do you think Brian Kelly's up against in terms of the difficulty of this schedule?
Well, don't tell LSU fans the win-loss total doesn't matter here, because they're going to be at the next. If they go 6-6 again, they might set something on fire. Something might be on fire. But the Vegas win total is at 7 right now, which I think is fair.
Yeah.
I think, and obviously, I think anybody who covers the team is usually a little bit more positive. So I'm at 8 wins, which still is, I think, lower than a lot of LSU fans and a lot of LSU writers. I'm at 8 pretty comfortably here. To talk about the schedule, though, especially the schedule before Auburn, this is where they have to get their wins. Like these 4 games have to be wins pretty much on the schedule. Florida State, they're going to be about 3-point favorites, 3.5-point favorites. Florida State, we know last year was a very disappointing year for them, and it's going to have to be an LSU win. Like this can't be UCLA. At least, I don't know. UCLA last year feels like a better team than Florida State this year, if that makes sense. And so I just don't expect LSU to lose that game. And so with that being the case, then you go to Southern, or then you play Southern, then you host Mississippi State, and then you host New Mexico. Obviously, Mississippi State's an SEC school. Anything can happen in that game. I just think LSU should be able to win it. And so you start off 4-0 in theory. And that really is the only scenario. You have to start off the year 4-0 because, as we both know, I mean, once you get in the SEC, it becomes not fun. It becomes not fun, at least for the teams. All right. I mean, Auburn, Tennessee, Florida, Ole Miss, Alabama, Arkansas is a stretch. Like it's just like you don't get a break. The 2 SEC teams or the 2 East teams that they're going to play are Tennessee and Florida, like I mentioned, and those aren't gimmies. Like I know Florida's not a world beater right now, but Tennessee with Hendon Hooker is going to be really good. And then UAB, who not for nothing, I think I've covered Conference USA a lot at North Texas. UAB, even though they just lost Bill Clark, their head coach, UAB is a tough team, man. I'm not saying LSU is going to lose, but that's a tough team to play there. That's not a gimme. And then Texas A&M you end it with. So you have to win your first 4 games. Then you get into the SEC, the meat of the SEC, and you hope you can go 4-4 the rest of the way and end it with an 8-4 record. And that would be a really successful year, in my opinion, for Brian Kelly's first season.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. That repeating and not showing improvement is kind of the name of the game. I think especially when you bring in somebody who's as high profile as Brian Kelly. Certainly Auburn, you look at their win totals are not very forgiving either. Even 6, 6.5, depending on where you look. And if they do 6-6 again, you can almost guarantee Brian Harsin will be out of there. And so that game, Barrett Saley from CBS Sports was yesterday talking about the most important SEC games for every team, and he put Auburn's as being LSU. I might be in a point of agreement there if you're looking at what it could do for the rest of the schedule. Same way, I think on the LSU side where they're starting off, and it's just at such a point in the season, the first game in October, where really, like you said, you're starting to get into the meat of that schedule where every week is a gauntlet. I think this game can do big things for whoever wins it. I don't know if the implications at the end of the year, because I don't think either of these teams, of course, are expecting. Of course, fans expect it, but aren't expected to be in contention for an SEC title this season. Yeah. But it just seems like the momentum gathered from this game could be really big for both of these programs, and it's a stadium. Look, Auburn has done well defending it at times, but also LSU's had history of coming into Jordan-Hare. They're one of the few teams that can come in there and they're not intimidated. They can get a win in there. I know we're still far out from this game, but just last one here, and then we'll let you go. What are just your early thoughts on this matchup, and like we were just talking about, the importance of it for what is going to be the remainder of LSU's schedule?
Yeah, well, when we look at this matchup, and this is something else I wanted to touch on, it'll be LSU's first road game of the year. Like Florida State, like you said, is in the Superdome. Then you have 3 straight home games. Then you go to Auburn. And I think you did a good job of kind of describing the importance from both sides here, because if LSU, in theory, well, even if they go 3-1 or 4-0 in those first 4 games, which I think are the 2 most likely outcomes, Auburn is going to be a game that decides, the trajectory of the season. I think once you get to that Alabama, Ole Miss, Arkansas stretch and A&M stretch, it's going to be really tough to pull out wins. And so Auburn is going to be a game where it's going to show you immediately, like, can this team win 8 or 9 games, or is this going to be a 7-win team? Now, like I said before, any game that LSU goes into, I think the defensive line is going to pretty much decide it. If the defensive line can be as good as I expect them to be, there's no reason that this defense shouldn't be in the top half of the SEC or a top 5 SEC defense. Like, they have all the potential here. And Matt House is a very respected defensive coordinator. We saw what he did at Kentucky a few years ago. Like, he's just proven it. So you give him this level of talent, in theory, it should work out. And whoever Auburn's quarterback ends up being, I think, obviously there's so many different options here. They're just like LSU in that respect, where they do bring some different aspects as well. It's going to come down to the offensive line in a lot of ways. And I think that's the same thing when you look at the other way, right? LSU is going to have to block. When we haven't talked much about the offensive line, but they did lose 4 of their 5 starters from last year to the NFL draft. 4 of them got drafted. And so they had to go to the transfer portal pool guys. They had to bring in Will Campbell, a true freshman, a 5-star guy that looks like he's going to play significant snaps. So with all that being the case, I think it just comes down to who can block. Like, who can really protect whoever the quarterback is, because we know there are going to be, both teams have some playmakers, and at the end of the day, it's just going to be who can get them into space, who can protect long enough for those big plays to happen. Because Bo Nix running around like Houdini for 40 yards. I went back and watched that game. It's even crazier when you go back and look at it, just because you just can't believe what just happened. Like,
He did it 3 or 4 times too.
Yeah, it didn't even happen just once or twice either. Like, it wasn't just the touchdown that everybody remembers. He did it one time to get out of a 3rd down, like get a 1st down. It kept happening and happening. What a game that was. But yeah, anyways, I just think it's about who can protect better, basically, and give their playmakers a chance, because I think both teams will have advantages on defense that I think they can take advantage of.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. Defensive line is not, it's not as strong as LSU's, I think, just because of that pass rush. But Derek Hall last year for Auburn was 3rd in the league in sacks. Colby Wooden has routinely been their top graded defensive guy, really productive. So I completely agree. It's Auburn's offensive line is on the opposite end. They return a lot of starters, but they return a lot of starters from a group that was shaky. So you wonder, what kind of effect that'll have this season. Yeah, I think the line of scrimmage in that game, as is the case in most SEC games.
Yeah, I know. It sounded kind of cliche after I said it, but I think every game for me is going to come down to those 4 defensive linemen. Yeah. If they dominate, then they'll win.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And for this team, for these 2 teams, it matters because of the quarterback situation. Still getting in a new guy at quarterback. You cannot have him running for his life, because, like you just mentioned, maybe Jaden Daniels could do that for LSU, but there's nobody on Auburn's roster that could do it. I mean, Robbie Ashford maybe, but he's never played in a college game before. Yeah, I was having flashbacks now of that game last season, and how great Bo Nix is going to be as a Pac-12 after dark quarterback this year. Just turning on my TV at 10:30 and just watching him run around the place against Washington State or something. It's going to be prime entertainment. But thank you so much to Matt for hopping on today. And this is probably the episode I've been most anticipating, because we're finally getting into, like you mentioned, the meat of the schedule, getting into these division opponents that Auburn fans love to hate, like LSU. So you guys can follow Matt at Matthew Brune _ on Twitter, and Geaux247. Of course, it's the Cajun, the Louisiana way of spelling. Go, it's LSU Tigers 24/7. You guys go follow all their stuff. We will, of course, loop back around with them when this game comes up in October, and definitely looking forward to that matchup in Jordan-Hare. So thank you guys so much for listening to this episode of the Auburn Undercover podcast. If you guys enjoyed it, please leave us a 5-star review. That is the number one thing that helps us out. The intro and outro music is by Beats by Mordecai. You guys can follow him on Twitter, SoundCloud, and Instagram. Until the next episode, we will talk to you guys later. Everybody have a great weekend.